Welcome to this Friday session. We'll go through workflows. We have with us Johnny today.
Hello, Jan Christian.
Hello. And we'll go over to screen sharing here. We'll enable it. Here we go. So here we are in the workflows register, and we'll go and start with the processes.
Yes, so here we have the register of all the defined processes. So this is basically how we configure a workflow process. And in Omega, we have a good collection of workflow processes defined. And what we're looking at here, Jan Christian, is the PIMS feature request that we utilize for many of our clients already.
Yes.
And that starts with the first step is that somebody needs to evaluate the request that comes in. And as you can see here, you can define which role takes care of that. It's also possible to not have a predefined role. That means that you have to select a specific person that is responsible for that step. But when it comes to evaluating a PIMS feature request, it's a support coordinator that takes care of it. And as you can see in the next column, we have the checklist. We have a checklist for PIMS feature request evaluation. So if you explain a little bit and show how that works, Jan Christian.
Yeah. So in this, as Johnny told, the step one here, there's already defined a checklist, and you can choose from the checklist library. So if you go over to the checklist library, and I filtered for the checklist on this, and here we can set up the items. Could be multiple items. You can categorize them with a header, so you can choose that one of them are header or multiple. So if you're building a larger checklist, it's nice to have them as sections. The type of the checklist, the organization unit, of course, for revision approval of more sophisticated checklists. That functionality is there as well.
Because this checklist library are also used in other modules, like for example in the activities that we've looked into in one of our previous sessions.
Yes.
So this can be very practical, and in this specific case, yes, there's a checklist that when a feature request comes in, have the user submitted sufficient details of the issue, and if there are known workarounds or alternatives for the users, has that been communicated to the user. So that's a good thing to verify before proceeding.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next step in the workflow process is then to provide an estimate in this case.
Yeah.
And when providing the estimate for the efforts required to do this, we would like to have some additional input fields that our workflow by default doesn't have, because it's not relevant in all cases.
Yeah.
So for that, we use this JSON concept. So you can explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, and same as the checklist, you can have a JSON object. We have a library, so you can choose from multiple. If we go into the register and we find the one for feature requests, we can see that we have created one object. You can then define rows, the columns, the width of it, the type, the name of the field, caption, title. We have chosen here as a field name, so it's a unique, and then you have the caption, which is more readable. Type should be a string, no limits to the length, and then the position, and the position is then for which workflow step this should be visible. So when we go through the process, we will show you, but in this case it will be in the step 2. It will always be as metadata for the whole workflow, but it's showing on, so you can have one object here with multiple fields, but they should show up in the different steps in the process. Makes it easier to navigate and for the different roles that are responsible to fill in the extra metadata required for this process.
It could be quite practical. Like for example, we have another work process for onboarding new employees in Omega. Then one of the things that is requested is the t-shirt size, for
Yes.
example, and then we have field values that you can pick from, like medium, large, extra large, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's quite practical, these possibilities.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, field values, so in those where you want a drop-down list of different values, like t-shirt sizes, you can then input here. So this is very flexible and it's very configurable to the needs.
But of course, a JSON object has some limitation compared to a proper database field, so just be aware of that. It should not be kind of overused when it's something that you really need to have a good data integrity, the filtering and searching, strong searching and filtering possibilities. Then JSON objects is not the thing for you.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. Okay, so we have set up the step for estimate, and then the next step is that somebody needs to approve this feature request.
Yeah.
And this is from a client perspective. Okay, we have provided an estimate, and then the client side will have to approve this estimate or not. So in this case, there's a client representative role that is taking care of that. And then implementation is software developer, document support coordinator, and finally verified by PIM's technical responsible. Of course, these workflows can be configured very differently. Here we looked at PIM's feature request, and we'll have a little look at how that will look in real. But just have a quick look at, for example, like another workflow we have like Punch. So for those working with the completion management, very familiar with the punch items, and it's possible to configure that also in Omega 365 when a punch is identified by someone out in the field. Somebody evaluates the registered punch, somebody takes care of executing or fixing it, and somebody needs to verify.
Yep.
And if you remove the filter there, you'll see that like in Omega we have I think more than 50, isn't it, workflow processes already defined.
Yeah. And it's
So
good to mention that the role, it's not necessary to, it's not mandatory to set the role. If there is no role, it should be decided who should do. Will come when we show the workflow itself, but you don't need to set the role. You then set to a specific person.
And finally, we can also mention that it's possible to set a step as mandatory. So if you scroll to the very right, there is a checkbox for mandatory.
Yes.
And also possible to say which org unit is responsible for executing that step. That's something that we will utilize, for example, when handling interface requests, where you typically have two contractors or multiple contractors dealing with a query or a request, and they need to be able to kind of change who is now responsible from a kind of based on an org unit instead. So it's very flexible and can be utilized. I mean, these workflows can be utilized to define all kinds of workflow processes.
Yeah. And when it comes to access, and if we'll go back to our the one we will show a full workflow of afterwards here. The access is based on a process and organization unit. So here you define which roles in your organization that shall have access to this process for the given organization. There are also some fields, and as you mentioned, Johnny, where you have a database field which is more filterable, searchable. There is one configurable field here which we call additional QA/QC measures, where you can define the different values, but those are more easily so. But again, they can be configured per process. Okay, should we show the? Go back to the workflow register and see if we already had one, but let's create a new PIMS feature request, and then
And nice thing here that our users should know about is that you can just do a paste. If you have a screenshot in your clipboard, just press Ctrl V and it's automatically uploaded into as an attachment.
Yeah.
Very practical.
So snipping tool is a nice way to document and paste that, and you can see that it popped into the attachments. So and you can so that's a nice feature. Severity can be chosen. Default is medium. Object can be attached to the workflow. So let's go ahead and submit this. So now it goes directly to evaluate step, and as we saw from the process setup, it was set to the support coordinator, and you can actually see here which users are members of the support coordinator role on the organization unit implementation project. And in this case, it's Johnny. So he already.
Yeah, I have it on my side. So I've just done a quick evaluation here now. So if you refresh on your side.
Yeah. So now we can see that it's gone from evaluate to estimate. So we can scroll down and we can see what Johnny. So he has a comment and he completed a checklist. We came to the second step, which is that PIM's technical responsible, and we can then see that is me. And here you can see the JSON object input. So the two fields that was added to the JSON. So we can have a comment. We can type in numbers.
In this case, it was configured as being text field, so kind of.
Yes.
And in this case, it's practical because you might need to be more like in a range or.
Yeah. Range. You can also then, if it specify the currency with the range or text as you see. The checklist. So we can choose. We can also write a comment if we would like that. We can complete this.
And another thing that's worth to mention is that you have also within each step the possibility to assign action. So if you need, so like in this case, Christian is responsible for this step, but he might need input. Or somebody else needs to provide the estimate really, so he can put an action to somebody in here to please estimate the worker, and then Christian is still responsible for this step and will move it on in the process.
So we can then, and then we choose one of the other members that has access to this workflow. You can set a due date if you would like to do that. So now there's and then same thing with the comments. You can collaborate through commenting during discussions in this particular step in the workflow. If we go to next step, and I blanked out. So let's do it was 10 to 20 currency. This was save that, and we'll move it to the approve step. You can also go if a step is not mandatory. You can go over step if it's not required to do the step. Here you can see that the step did not have a particular member, so you can actually set it. You can select from persons. If it was yourself, you can choose. So we can set this to a person which has access to the workflow. So now we moved it further to Andreas. On the right side, you can see that you have the metadata. Here you also have this additional QA/QC measures that you can choose from based on the setup of this process.
And on the left side of the workflow steps, that's where the initial request with the information is shown, including like the estimate that was provided on one of the steps. It's still showing here as a part of the request itself, so it's easy to find it there.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think we need to go through the whole process here. Many of you are already using it. So is there anything more we should show here, Jan Christian? Or
No, I think this explains a good portion of the workflows and the processes, the different possibilities you have with the checklist, the dynamic object or JSON objects, and how flexible it is.
Yeah. Okay, then I think this was it for today, and we'll see you next Omega Friday.
Yes, next Friday we are ready. Okay. See
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.
See you. Bye bye.